Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to The Skinny for Friday, April 4, 2025. My name is Ray Rowe. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Bay Area's nearly 40-year-old alt-weekly Creative Loafing. Joining us via Zoom this morning is the show's co-founder, Mitch Perry. He's the senior reporter at the nonprofit Florida Phoenix Newsroom. He is just living the dream and officially past the halfway point of the legislative session in Tallahassee, which has been spicy as usual, but really exciting over the last week. Mitch, would you agree?
That's one way of looking at it, Ray. Good morning to you and good morning to the listeners. And I look forward to one of these shows coming up, talking more about what's happening up here in Tallahassee. As always, a lot maybe not so great, actually, for the listeners. I'm thinking specifically about the proposal that will really limit citizen-led constitutional amendments, and we can get into that, in a future show. But we got a lot going on today's show, and we really want to invite listener participation later in the program. So, Ray, as you know, we have these two congressional elections earlier this week, right? Special congressional elections in District 1, District 6. These were two openings because Donald Trump selected Matt Gaetz in District 1 to be, at one point, to be his Attorney General. And, of course, District 6, Mike Waltz to be his National Security Advisor. Gaetz is no longer there. Now he's doing nightly shows on OAN, which, by the way, cannot be seen in Florida at all. Mike Waltz, after Signalgate, maybe he's a little tentative right now. But there's been a lot of talk about this because there was a lot of money put into these campaigns for seats that maybe were never going to be won by the Democrats. These were seriously ruby red seats, as they called them, 30-point victories for Republicans last November. Donald Trump won by even bigger margins. So was it the right thing to do, how it all played out? And we've got a couple of strategists we're going to have on the program. We're going to begin this morning, with Chris Mitchell, who is a Democratic strategist who has worked in Hillsborough County, the Tampa Bay area, based out of the Orlando area, I believe, right now. Chris, good morning, Chris Mitchell.
Good morning, Mitch. How are you this morning?
Great to have you on here with us here on The Skinny. And Chris, you are in the Orlando area these days, right?
Yes, I've been in Orlando now for about 10 years. A lot of people still think I live in Tampa, though.
Exactly. Well, you still do races here in Tampa, though, right?
Yeah. The Bay Area, we have a lot of races. Our firm is Statecraft Digital. We're now in close to 18 states, but Hillsborough County and the Tampa Bay area, we still have a lot of clients.
Yeah, absolutely. We can talk about that a little later. So, Chris, let's talk about, of course, these races that went on Tuesday. Just for the listeners, if they aren't familiar, let's see, we've got in District 1, Jimmy Patronis, the former chief financial officer. He defeated Gabe Alamont by, I believe, 15 points in that district. And also in District 6, Republican Randy Fine, former state senator, he defeated Democrat Josh Wheel by 14 points. So people are looking at this in different ways. Was it not a moral victory for Democrats, but certainly, much better than what happened in November. But again, a lot of money spent. And you wrote an op-ed. I saw your comment, I think, last week in Facebook, which is what intrigued me about this, because there was a lot of talk amongst Democrats about whether this was appropriate to be spending so much money on a couple of elections that were really going to be very, very, very difficult to win. And let me just give our listeners a little piece of what you wrote about. This is from Chris Mitchell's op-ed that he wrote, called, the column was called "Democrats, This Is Not How We Win." And I quote, Chris wrote, quote, "We're fueling a system that prioritizes emotional appeal over strategic outcomes. And while small dollar donors give in good faith, believing their contribution might flip a seat, the only people consistently benefiting are the consultants cashing the checks. This isn't just poor planning, it's donor abuse. It's an unethical use of resources in a state that desperately needs long-term investment. Even the state party and the DNC, institutions that typically bring oversight and structure to competitive races, got swept up in the momentum." And then you continued on. I don't know what internal conversations may have happened, but from the outside, it looked like no one stepped in to apply the kind of rigor or accountability we expect in viable races. And that's not a criticism of leadership. It's simply a hard truth about what happens when hope and hype go unchecked. So after what happened on Tuesday night, do you still feel the same way?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, this is I hate to say this, Mitch, I've now been involved in Florida politics for over 2 decades, which means I'm getting older, of course. But how many special elections have we seen Democrats do very well and successful, and only to a few months later lose it in the general election, right? And nothing is left behind. And I think these are kind of the two extremes of that, right? 2 districts that Trump President Trump had won by north of 30 points in the general election in last year. And, we've now heard the last 3 days the Florida Democratic Party and others take victory laps on losing by double digits. And, that is not how we build long-term systemic infrastructure in the state. And that's not how we produce long-term outcomes. It's just the same craziness cycle over cycle.
So let's talk about this, though. Right, there was a lot of money. I think roughly 20 million put in, 14 million. Josh Weil says he raised. Gabe Valmont raised between 6 and 7 million, I believe. That was so far out more than the Republicans raised. We're kind of looking like they were sleepwalking through these races because they thought they had it in the bag. But Chris, I know, I'm sure a lot of this money did come from out of state. There were fundraising appeals to Democrats who were fired up and angry about what's going on with the Trump administration, with Doge and Elon Musk. So, I hear from some folks maybe like, oh, this money should go to somewhere else, infrastructure for registration. But some of these folks are probably not going to ever give money for that, right? I mean, they saw this as something kind of sexy here, if you will, something to get excited about. Hey, maybe these guys can pull off the incredible if they really did know the fact that these were 30 plus races.
Yeah. Well, listen, I think I said in my article too, like I'm under no delusion that this 20 million would have come in if it wasn't for these races, right? These candidates ran, and, put the belief in these donors that we could flip Congress, right? And that's, given what's happened over the last 2 months, I think that's a lot of Democrats would put their energy in it. But I think to tell some elderly person in Ohio that's living off Social Security that with their $25 donation they can flip these 2 seats in Florida is just a full-on lie. There is no reality in which we were going to win these seats, right? We had, I have a lot of respect and think highly of Gabe Valmont, right? And she took on Matt Gaetz last cycle, right? Matt Gaetz, with all of his baggage, still won that district by 30 points, right? And we're taking victory laps on flipping Escambia. We didn't flip Escambia, right? That Escambia is not going to perform that way in a general election, right? It's just, the infrastructure is not there yet, and things of that nature. So I think when I'm talking about, investing, right, is how are we able to tell and be honest with our donors, and how do we get them, right? It's not sexy, right, to invest in infrastructure building, but to get them and make them understand that this is how we turn back states like Florida, that now I think our disadvantage in registration is like 1.5 million, where in 2018, right, last midterm that Trump was president, I think our advantage was like 300 or so thousand, right, Democrats. And so we have to, those are the conversations we need to be having versus the short-term emotional appeals that leave the party nowhere.
Again, if you're just tuning in, listen to Skinny. I'm Mitch Perry with Ray Rowe, talking to Chris Mitchell, Democratic strategist out of Orlando. Ray, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, we had a guest last week who responded in a way to the criticism that is similar to what you talked about in the op-ed. And they said, well, can these folks criticizing the approach in the Panhandle and Ocala point to competitive races that they've won? And I just wanted to give you a chance to kind of speak directly to that since you've been involved in this for so long.
Sorry, wait, like races that I've competitively won?
Yeah, or just like anyone, like criticizing, hey, this isn't the approach that we should take. He was basically saying, well, what competitive races have they won recently? So I would just offer that platform to you and say, here's what I've done, and here's why I think it works.
Well, listen, I've had a history personally and with this firm of competing in races and flipping counties. Let's take Hillsborough County, for example. I was involved in Andrew Warren's race when he took out a 16-year incumbent, right? Involved in Bob Enriquez's when we flipped that race. There's a lot of state legislative races, Representative Adam Hattersley, which that was written off at that point, right? And we were able to really build in 2018 that district where we saw an opportunity to flip it, and we were able to get a great candidate, right? And be able to get people to invest in that race, and we flipped it, right? So I think the bigger point here is taking a look at the map as Democrats as we sit right now, right? And where we are, and be honest with ourselves. And we need to invest in areas where we can claw back. Like, now this is 2 cycles where Hillsborough County has now been red, right? Let's not lie to ourselves. And every day the registration advantage for Republicans continues to grow. where are we talking about investing and making sure that we're able to buffer that, right? You've got some really important races on the ballot this cycle. We're talking about Harry Cohen. We're talking about some other folks that could be potentially in trouble if we do not buffer back the registration advantage. And so I am saying, and my point is to answer that person is, we could go on and list resumes of competitive races, but the bigger point here is that we had no business telling donors we were going to win those seats, right? And that was a straight up lie, right? We could have invested, we could have ran ads of like, hey, we're investing long term. These are seats where we could potentially be competitive down the road. But no, it was invest now, even 48 hours before the election of we're on the verge of flipping this seat. Please invest now, when they already, Republicans already had a 9 and 15% turnout advantages when they're running these ads where there's no math that would allow us to win those races. So I think that's the bigger point here, right?
Yeah, Chris.
Right.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, Mitch. Can I ask a question real quick? Chris, you kind of alluded to that. Like, what could we have done with the $20 million? You said this in the op-ed. We could have launched the largest voter registration program Florida has ever seen. And I'm wondering, because I'm thinking about donor fatigue. A lot of people have been loath to really donate to the party, but they will continue to vote for Dems until a better third option appears. But really, I talk to a lot of people, and they're just like, I'm sick of getting text messages raising for money. I'm sick of seeing, these huge fundraising hauls and us not winning. How worried are you that people are just going to stop giving money because they're just over it?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the biggest fears coming out of all this, right, is we hyped up these races as huge opportunities for us. We raised north of $20 million, probably even close to 25 when it's all said and done, right? And we got our butt kicked by double digits in both races, right? And so if I gave money to that, I'm like, what am I investing in, right? The next time I see an ad, like, imagine if this was in CD 13, right, in the Pinellas district, where in a special election we could win that race, right? They're not likely to give as much or give next time, right? So I think that is the bigger thing that we need to focus on how we're doing this. And also I want to point out, too, for your listeners, is we say 20 million, 25 million raised, not all that was spent on actual voter communication and organizing, right? A lot of this was raised by consultants that spent a lot of money to get a lot of money back, to basically get a profit margin very much back. So you spend $2 million in digital ads to get $2.5 million back with a net of $500,000, right? To use simple math there, right? And so a lot of that money was spent on ads to basically get that money back. And so, and then on top of that, as I'll let your listeners go listen or go read what's been talked about with these consultants in these races, they're taking 25% plus of the profits. So you take that off the top. So at the end of the day, maybe a few million went to voter communications out of that, right? And maybe some organizing. But when we're talking about 20, 25 million, we're expecting, okay, well, at least there's an infrastructure left behind, right? No, right? There's nothing left behind. A lot of this is going to people's bank accounts before it even gets to people knocking on doors.
And we're going to talk to one of those consultants you're referring to, Chris, in just a moment here. Before we let you go, Chris, I do want to talk about Hillsborough County. Now, you ran, I think, some campaigns last fall. Sean Shaw, were you involved in this race? Is that correct?
I think Sean was like the only race. Sean and Craig Latimer was the only race I wasn't really involved in. So.
Okay. That you were or not? I'm sorry.
That I were not involved in.
You were not? Okay. But you obviously saw what happened in Hillsborough. You mentioned that earlier. And right now, I looked at the voter registration change, and it's about 3,000 Republicans. So it was about even, I think, last fall. Obviously, so in Hillsborough itself, because you do work there right now, there's just so much momentum, obviously, with the Republicans statewide over the last few years. And whether Hillsborough is red or blue, it's very close right now. So it seems like, this could go either way. So what's going to happen there when you work on these campaigns in 26 to change this? I mean, we're talking about infrastructure. I know that actually the party's had some fissures, which I wrote about in Florida Phoenix actually recently. But nevertheless, there's still a lot of dedicated people raising money trying to get candidates victorious there. But what's your the outlook about this? Because it's one thing when we see some of these other places that have gone red that may or may not ever come back again. Hillsborough seems like it's eminently viable, but yet Andrew Warren lost by 5 points, I think, last fall. And Sean Shaw, I don't think he was very close at the end of the day. And that was a bit surprising, and then maybe it wasn't. So your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I've had several conversations over the last few months with electeds and party leaders there, and I've been ringing the bell as loud as I possibly can that this is the last cycle for us to hold the line in Hillsborough County. We need to invest heavily in voter registration to be able to give our electeds an opportunity. We have the ability here to hold serve with Commissioner Cohen and to be able to potentially pick up 2 county-wide seats. If we don't hold serve, or in best case scenario, increase the voter registration back for Democrats, it's going to be very difficult for our candidates, regardless of who they are and how much money they raise, to be able to be competitive. I think going into, obviously, this year, we're going to have some momentum on our side if things continue the way they are with President Trump. But looking beyond this cycle, and goes back to, I think, a greater point I'm trying to make here, is we have to start looking long-term as a party and start investing in areas that are going to take cycle over cycle investment. And Hillsborough County is one of those counties which is on the cusp, and we need to be able to invest heavily in voter registration, local organizing, and being able to protect what we have and be able to get back to relevancy on the county level, right? It was a big gut punch, obviously, to lose Andrew's race. We lost Cindy Stewart, who is a terrific public servant as well in the clerk's office. And so if we're not going to continue to invest here, those losses are going to continue to happen. And so we need to make sure that we're thinking investment-wise in the county versus just, 5 months before an election, oh crap, we got to get our crap together. We need to be doing it right now for long term.
All right. He is Chris Mitchell with Stagecraft Digital, consultant in Florida, doing races for over a decade here. Chris, great to talk to you this morning. Thank you so much for your contributions here.
Thank you, Mitch. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
Yeah, and joining us right now, Mitch, he has just walked into the studio here, fresh off a campaign. He was invoked indirectly here in your last conversation. Jackson McMillan from Key Lime Strategies is here with us today. How you doing today, Jackson?
Hanging in. It's been recovering.
You look really fresh for like a guy that just ran
the New York Times called the day after the election and said, can we send someone down for a photo and interview? And so I was like, I looked ragged. I had been in District 6 for almost 3 weeks, living out of whatever, couch surfing across that geographically massive district and helping out in every way I could, as we got close to Election Day. Knocked a lot of doors with the candidate directly. That was a lot of fun. Just helping coordinate everything. So I looked ragged. And so I rushed to Great Clips, was like, I need you to clean me up. The New York Times is coming, right? So that was
shout out to Great Clips because it did a great job.
Thank you. It was definitely a once in a lifetime experience. And that was, I'm really grateful for the recognition for my work.
And Mitch wants to ask you about that work.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Good morning, Jackson. Great to have you with us. Thanks so much for coming to the studio. So I think you heard Chris Mitchell there, and I know you've heard from others certainly who basically thought, okay, yeah, you raised a lot of money here for these 2 races that were going to be super tough to win. You overperformed. The Democrats did overperform here, but was it worth it at the end of the day? And did these consultants? They're the ones who really made out strongly, and people are looking at you. What do you say when you hear some of that coming back at you?
So I think that's a huge compound question, Mitch. I'd call objection if I were in a court of law. But there's so I'll take that one at a time. So I think the first thing to start with is that what were these races ever winnable? And my answer, absolutely. I mean, we're seeing massive pushback. Our polling internally on the Josh Weil campaign matched the White House's lead pollster that came out less than a week before Election Day.
Tony Fabrizio.
Right. So I'm a young person in this space. I have a lot of imposter syndrome, right? So when my polling numbers that my firm ran matched Tony Fabrizio's, I was like, oh, I must be doing something right? So but point being, the White House got scared. They pulled Stefanik's nomination. They pulled time out of the president's schedule twice to do telephone town halls to rally voters in District 6. I've seen it happen. I've worked on a lot of Central Florida races over the years, none with this level of spending, but I've had the Republicans on the ropes in red seats a few times, and every time I call it the DeSantis firing squad is what I used to call it. The black SUVs roll into town. All of a sudden you start getting calls from your supporters all around the districts about, pretty people in campaign shirts for your opponents knocking on doors. Make no mistake, we forced them, Trump and Elon Musk, to mobilize millions of dollars in last-minute GOTV efforts because even their polling had us winning if they didn't do something. Sometimes it's about forcing the other side to react. I'm a longtime Magic the Gathering player, and in the competitive community,
Dungeon Master, guys.
One of our sayings is "make them have it," right? Like, there's not every time you swing on them, they're going to have the perfect defensive option. A couple times your punches are going to get through, and as Democrats, we're always on the defensive. And we had an opportunity here because of Social Security and Medicare and Elon Musk's Doge program, which is hugely unpopular. I mean, look at CD1. That district has more federal jobs than almost any other congressional district in the country. We had an opportunity to make them have it, and we took a big swing, and I'm proud of what we did. I mean, to take the second part of your question on where the money could have gone, 1 million doors got knocked. I mean, I have to agree with Mr. Mitchell at the end of his last segment here. We do need long-term organizing and investment, and we do need doors knocked. To be clear, congressional districts in Florida don't knock over 500,000 doors. I mean, many of around here, we see campaigns bragging on their Instagrams about knocking 10,000 doors over the course of 2 years and how that's an accomplishment. We did over 1 million between these two campaigns in less than 9 weeks. That is investment. Those are conversations in areas with red voters that haven't had a conversation with the Democrats since Obama 2008, or maybe even before that, like if at all, right? I mean, Gay Valamont flipped Escambia County blue. Josh Wheel held the lead in Volusia County up until the very, very end of votes counted. Those are two counties that have been written off by so much of leadership and that kind of thing. And I think if this proves anything, it's that the Florida Democratic Party, this is not a red state. It's an underinvested in state. And we can't joke around that these things don't cost large amounts of money, right? And so I'll then take your third question, which is that, the consultants got away with the big share of the pie. I would say that's once again just like absolutely inaccurate. I mean, if we look at, the fact that it costs money to make money. I mean, these campaigns were entirely powered by small dollar contributions, right? There were, the DNC didn't send a huge amount of money. The DCCC told us they were basically broke at the beginning of the campaigns and couldn't help us, right? Like the Florida Democratic Party, shout out Nikki Fried, they did their absolute best with the resources they had available. And I would say of all the major entities, like they were the most invested. But like regardless, like it was a fraction, a drop in the bucket of the amount of money we pulled in from around the country, and it costs money to solicit that money. I mean, we live in an era where it costs money to send texts, it costs money to send emails, it costs money to do what has been our feature thing, as we call it, the Build the Legend Facebook ads program, which is where rather than running boring, static, blasé political graphics with a donation link, we have candidates hop on selfie style video cam and react in real time to world events happening or react in real time to things happening on their campaigns. And then we put money behind getting that information out everywhere. And to be clear, my fee structure, unlike the person who was on the call here previously before me, is transparent on my website and static across every single one of my campaigns that I work on. Look, I'm not the only operative here in Florida, and these were big races. You would think that these candidates, right, that they got them and their experience, strategy, and campaign management, and that kind of thing, they got lots of other offers from other firms around the country to work with them. And they compared our pricing structure and their pricing structure and chose us, right? And we are transparent, and I'm really big on transparency and pricing. And I tell people all the time, if you don't want to use our services, don't. You don't have to. You can go to someone else. And I say to all the other people who are saying, you need to, that money could have been raised and spent in other places. My reaction to that is, cool, do it. Like I don't disagree. Money needs to be spent on voter registration. Go raise it. Right. And what I think they'll quickly discover is that it costs money to make money. Right. And then especially in large dollar national scale, I think we had over 700,000 individual contributors from around the country. That's between the two campaigns. That is a massive, massive groundswell, right? That's
Jackson, excuse me. Go
ahead.
Yeah, you're on a roll. For our listeners, it's 11:30 right now. If you're tuning in to The Skinny here on WMNF, Mitch Perry here in Tallahassee, Ray Roa back in the studio in Tampa. We're speaking with Jackson McMillan. He's with Keyline Strategies. He was very much involved in the two congressional races that went on earlier this week in Florida, in the District 1 and District 6 race. Jackson was very involved, like I said, very involved with that. And Jackson, you did so much to respond to what you just said there. It's true. People can go on your website and there's a breakdown about what you charge. So you are very transparent there as well. A couple things, and one thing that Chris Mitchell said I think is worth talking about though, and that is these were special elections really in a vacuum in the respect that other than that Wisconsin Supreme Court race that we had also on Tuesday that really brought in money all around the country and was soon to be a real national race. These races were, I know, heck, I have an uncle in the San Francisco Bay Area, right, who got a text or an email like, 5 weeks ago talking to me about these races. So there was outreach around the country. And I'm curious, do you know what the breakdown is, how much money came in outside of Florida versus inside? Because I know this is, again, Democrats around the country who are feeling very frustrated right now. They wanted to get involved. They wanted to participate. Do you have a breakdown on that?
Yeah, so I can pretty confidently say that this is not unique to special elections. I mean, that we raised over almost 90% of the money was from outside of Florida. And so, but that's not a new phenomena. That's part of national fundraising.
Sure. No, but that's I'm glad you told me that. But the thing is, what Chris Mitchell said was about Democrats do well in these special elections because they are different. You talk about all the investment, and there's no question about it. You made phenomenal investment on the ground in those districts. But when you've got, say, November of 2026, or when you've got 28 congressional elections going on, and Democrats, there's 20 that are held by Republicans right now. It doesn't seem like there's going to be enough available out there, enough energy, enough money to do that same type of investment as you could in these two special elections where nothing else is going on in the state and really around the country right now. So, and at the end of the day, they were still double-digit losses. Not to belittle the work that you did, because it was tremendous. But nevertheless, do you see where, I guess, the way we look at this, and I know it's being looked at nationally, again, because Donald Trump is starting to, sag a little bit in public opinion polling, not just amongst Democrats right now, is that how much can you really take away from these races going forward? What do you think about that?
So, I mean, I think there's, once again, multiple parts to what you said. And so I think we're headed towards a blue wave, personally. I mean, there's a reason he waited to impose these tariffs until after April 1st, right? Like, I think that if he had, been impulsive and done it then, I mean, all the memoirs we read of people who worked in Trump White House 1.0 is that Trump's not a chess player. They're just trying to stop him from eating the pieces, right? So, like, there's, if he had done something impulsively right before Election Day, I think we could have really even seen, a blue victory in these seats. Or alternatively, if they had gotten arrogant and invested less money, we also could have seen a blue victory there. And I think we do need to compete in, close races across the country. And I think that the narrative that has been spun over the last couple of years, that national money has abandoned Florida, I think I've kind of called BS on that, for the lack of a better word, with the work I've done in this special cycle and the previous cycle. It's not that national money has abandoned Florida. It's that as Florida Democrats, we've either lost our touch or never had it in the storytelling and the way you have to get that donation to Florida. You have to make yourself, at least appear viable, right? And that comes with actual investment. I mean, one of our most successful fundraising ads that we ran in the last 2 weeks of the campaign was a group of college students from Tallahassee who had driven across the state to come knock doors in one of the final weeks of the election, and they were talking to a voter who they had just convinced to come vote, right? Like, that's not a selfie-style React video from one of these candidates. That's demonstrating of real things happening on the ground. And I think far too often we're fundraising as Democrats nationally as well. This is not Florida at all, off of shock value. Trump did this, Trump did that. Nancy Pelosi is bleeding out and needs your $5 to stop it, right? People don't want to see that. They don't want to give into indefinite pots of money that, it's unclear where that's going. When we told our donors on these races, we need to raise, $200,000 to knock, whatever door equivalent that was. I want to say it was somewhere around the lines of like, 50,000, 75,000 through the paid field firm the campaigns were using. That was real. There were no, deceptive 300x match actives that went out on these campaigns. Everything was real storytelling, and people got invested invested in the legend of what we were doing. And I think if Florida Democrats want to, and once again, it doesn't have to be me. I encourage other people to do this, right? Like you have to be real. And, I saw this one Facebook comment online that was saying, he got paid all those money for those crappy ads. And what they don't realize was that that like gritty, real TikTok influencer style, messaging, cell phone cam stuff makes people more invested because it's less polished. It's more real. And as Democrats, the biggest complaint is that we're too, rigid and static and, and we're eager to call people out on things, right? If you're not picture perfect. And it's a disconnect from even Americans who align with us on a lot of our values. People don't want picture perfect polish digital. They want, to be a part of a movement. And being a part of a movement is accessibility and honesty. And I think that's what we did here. And I think that's what Florida Democrats need to do moving forward.
Let me ask you, you took a little heat for having AOC in an ad, and you got that cease and desist from David Hogg's lawyers. But, you've described that here in the New York Times as pretty much just a misunderstanding. And you noted that you're 23 years old.
Yep.
David Hogg, who's been on the show here before, he's 24 years old. You guys are in that young generation. I think all Democrats are looking to your generation to carry this thing forward. Have you had a chance to talk to David since that? Do you think you'll get together and be able to talk and figure this little spat out? I don't even know.
So
what's as bad as Twitter.
I would love to. I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding. I've called Vice Chair Hogg numerous times since that happened, and I've been a little disappointed that he hasn't responded or been interested in having a conversation with me. I mean, ultimately, I have a lot of respect for the vice chair, right? Like, I'm a big believer in youth leaders in this space. I've personally been extremely invested and time, energy, money in building up the youth caucuses here in Florida. 3 years ago, the young Democrats, the college Democrats, the high school Democrats here were jokes. Now they are probably one of the most influential endorsements because that carries money and significant manpower that a Democrat in a primary can have in the state of Florida. That's been a large part of, lots of young voices like Vice Chair Hogg, like Congressman Maxwell Frost, coming up out of this space and giving people, a banner that as a young person, you can do something in this space. And so ultimately, I do think, it was a misunderstanding. I mean, the Rep AOC thing got a little blown out of proportion. I mean, she didn't contact the campaigns. She didn't even critique the campaigns. She corrected an incorrect headline on Twitter, which was that she was fundraising for the campaigns, which was not true. She wasn't. She called attention to our campaigns on an Instagram Live. We got excited that the AOC thought these races were important, and we used it just like a public news clipping that campaigns use in advertisements all the time, right? I think the Vice Chair Hogg situation was a little bit different. Vice Chair Hogg was flown to district, paid to be there by the campaigns. And Vice Chair Hogg did a bunch of photos and videos with the candidates. He was generous with his time to help launch fundraisers and canvases. And so I think the vice chair was under the impression that I was some kind of outside entity because I wasn't there on the ground when he was there, right? Whereas my title was digital fundraising director on both of these campaigns, right? I was meeting with the team on a daily basis, running things by them, that kind of thing. And so the instant we got wind that the vice chair was frustrated, we pulled everything down, we complied totally and apologized profusely. And we just were under the impression that if the vice chair was comfortable with a candidate posting, a video that he reposted onto his own social media on their campaign, I mean, effectively, all we really do at Key Lime is we do a glorified boost button that anybody can do on Facebook, right? And that's kind of what we did. And so we were a little bit surprised. We were like, oh, okay. But, that's the nature of the beast, and we would never want to, offend the vice chair. And so we pulled it down. And, ultimately, Vice Chair Hogg and I are very similarly aligned, like you said. And I would love to work with him more. I think we both have a lot of the same goals, and my phone's always available to him. And I look forward to seeing what he does as vice chair going forward.
Vice Chair Hogg column. That's the voice of Jackson McMillan, by the way. He's the subject of a brand new New York Times story. It's called Meet the 23-Year-Old Student Who Raised $25 Million in Democratic Losses. And Great Cuts did a great job. And I see Zach Whitman took the photo. He did a great job. Jackson, if you would, please stick around with us for the rest of the show here. We're on until noon. Joining us here in the studio, and I know it's radio, but two faces very familiar to me. One of them belongs to Celine Sanfelice, founder of Tampa Bay's Axios newsletter, now the managing editor here at Creative Loafing Tampa Bay. Celine, thanks for being here with us today, and welcome back to The Skinny.
Thank you for having me.
And the other face has a beard. His hair's not quite as white as mine. I usually see his face behind a megaphone at protests around town. It's Pastor Andy Oliver from St. Pete's Allendale United Methodist. Pastor Andy, thank you for being here today.
Happy to be here.
He's here today. I know we've got some time ahead of Easter here, but Creative Loafing's a little bit of ahead of Easter. And Celine spent some time talking to the pastor over the last week, and they had a really good conversation. Figuring out the graphics for our story was a great exercise in some of Pastor Andy's beliefs. And we wanted to talk to Pastor Andy. Mitch, I don't think we've done a religious show, but this is as close as we're going to get.
And of course, it's great to make it gay.
Yes, Pastor Andy's a church very well known for its stances advocating and standing up for the LGBTQ plus community. A few weeks ago, you might have seen Pastor Andy sticking up, pressing back against a policy by the St. Petersburg police. And he's just always been out there. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Pastor Andy, a few summers ago, there was a sleep-in for rent control at St. Pete, and some folks got ticketed by the police. And you picked up those ticket fines, right?
Yeah, a group was doing a sleep-in just because city council and the mayor were not willing to listen and to implement rent control or even consider it. And so when I got there, I heard the police were coming out, and I paid everyone $1 for their tents so that the police would have to negotiate with me and decide if they wanted to, with all the cameras on, arrest someone in a collar who was advocating for those that can't afford to live here.
Yeah, and, Celine and I were going over the notes of your talk. We wanted to do an Easter story. We said, we've never really done one. Who are we going to talk to? Let's talk to Pastor Andy. She told me that you guys talked about the concept of Easter, the resurrection, and you called it God's big middle finger to the empire. You described the holiday and kind of what it marks as a form of divine protest, as I understand. And we can't say the word, but a holy F you to a system that crushes bodies and breaks spirits, I think was the quote. Can you expound on that? I'm a lifelong Catholic. I've went to Catholic school, been to a lot of church, never heard a man in a collar say that before.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about salvation, right, and getting saved, but really salvation isn't about going to heaven. Salvation is really a salve, a healing force that's pulsing through every protest, every jail cell. And, resurrection itself is real. It's there every time someone refuses to give up, every time someone rises from the ashes to continue on. It's there in our solidarity with one another. And it's definitely lived out in community. And I have one of the best jobs in the world because I get to remind people that this is a revolution.
And Pastor Andy, I wanted to ask you, because yesterday we talked about how you are so active in the community and how you can keep going, like with the message of Easter. How do you keep going when there's not just one issue or two issues? It's not just about LGBTQ people or immigrants. It's about so many different things. How do you manage to have the energy to fight for so many different communities?
It's tough. Right now, people are coming up to me that people I don't know, and when I go to a coffee shop or if I'm at a party, and they're asking, what do we do? What's the plan? And I think the plan right now is we need to double down on our building community and our organizing. The deep relationships are going to be what sees us through this time, and it is what our ancestors showed us, the pathway forward. Our ancestors who saw much worse conditions than what we're experiencing now have kind of given us a path for how we fight back, how we resist, and how we be church in this moment. And so that's my job, right, as a pastor, of how do we be a faithful church in this moment when the state, the country, empire is hurting and harming so many people, especially those that are on the margins. Dr. King in his brilliance, talked about that a church should be less of a thermometer, taking the temperature of popular opinion or trying to make people comfortable, and it should be more of a thermostat, setting the temperature when people are being eviscerated by injustice. The church should be out front, setting the temperature and leading in ways that create beloved community.
Yeah. What do you tell people when obviously they're saying, what do we do? But I personally feel it like an exhaustion, like just feeling like this is a tsunami and you can't fight it. You're tired of fighting. What do you tell people, or what advice do you give them when they say, like, I just don't know if I have it in me anymore, or I don't feel hope?
That's one of the brilliance of community. I shared with you when we talked earlier, I played tuba in the marching band. And if you've ever played tuba and you have to hold out a really long note, you know it's impossible. But in a tuba section, it is possible to hold out a note for 20 beats. Because when you need to breathe, the person next to you can keep playing. It's called staggering your breathing. And so we stagger our breathing in community as we fight back, and each really listen for what our call is and the ways that we're being asked to step up, whether it's to, go to the protest this Saturday, or to write an op-ed, or to make phone calls, or to simply be there for people on the margins that are being erased, being dehumanized, and saying no. We've opened up our church to house people who are undocumented, people that are experiencing homelessness, and to making sure that as a church, our religious obligation is being lived out. And we'll fight that all the way if ICE or DeSantis himself tries to come into our building.
Yeah. I am very familiar with Allendale, and I live right down the street. I run a book club through Tombolo that you guys have opened your doors for us to meet there. And I understand, and I see the rainbow flags and the signs, and I get it, but I feel like there's still a lot of people who have, especially queer people, who have a really big hesitancy towards the church, and feel rejected by the church, and are even unsure of churches with drag queen sermons and rainbow flags. And for people who are lacking that community or are scared of a church as a way to become active, like, what can they do? Like, what can they do?
Yeah, the church has done a lot of harm and continues to do a lot of harm. And we have a lot to repent for. And so I decided, as someone called into ministry where most of my friends, most of people my age as a Gen Xer don't attend church, I decided to stay in it and felt called to reform the church. And that's why, as a United Methodist pastor, when for decades it was not legal according to our denomination to officiate weddings, we said, no, we're officiating weddings, and let the denomination come and tell us otherwise. Let them pull me out in handcuffs if they really feel like that's the right thing to do. And our witness was a witness, a part of a lot of Methodist pastors and churches across the country saying this is not the way. And ultimately, the church voted last year to change its policy. We were showing the church what the future could look like and how it's lived out faithfully. And we have created a space for people that have been harmed and hurt, if they choose to come back to reclaim their faith in a different way. People maybe even that participated in that harm, right? That now want to turn away from doing that harm and need to deconstruct some of the things they believed to be true about God or the Bible, can now come into this space and reconstruct in a way that actually builds up instead of tears down. But I would just want to say, for anyone that's listening that's been harmed by the church, I'm sorry, and it crushes my heart and my spirit every time I see a church or a pastor doing harm. I think it's one of the worst stains on the church. And people don't need a church to be connected to God or each other, right? That happens everywhere community is flourishing. But being a part of a church that is trying to live in the way that Jesus showed us can be an opportunity for someone to heal from the trauma of their past and to build a different future.
And if you're just joining us, that voice you're hearing belongs to Pastor Andy Oliver. He's the pastor at Allendale United Methodist Church in St. Petersburg. We're talking about church. We're talking about Easter. We're talking about God. And if you do want to join us in these last moments, send a text 813-433-0885. Call 813-239-9663. We also have some text messages that we'll read after Mitch asks his question here.
Yeah, good morning, Pastor Andy Oliver from Tallahassee. Andy, I'm up here, and I know you've been around doing your work for a long time now, and I'm thinking about this being up here in the state capitol. Wanted to remind you, remember the listeners, remind the listeners about when you were up here. I think it was in 2020 when you, at the request of Representative Jennifer Webb at the time, you delivered a invocation that was not exactly welcome with warm reception up here in the GOP-controlled legislature. Can you talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, I was asked to give the invocation for opening day. I don't know if that's what they call it.
Day or
baseball,
what
whatever. I don't know. Anyway, I was supposed to give the invocation, and as I was pulling into Tallahassee the night before, the chaplain called me and asked if I had gotten the rules for the prayer. And I said, yeah, I got them a month ago when we arranged this. And he said, no, the new rules. And I looked quickly, and the rules hadn't been rewritten in about 30 years. And he quickly said, this isn't because you're coming. And I'm like, okay, if you say so. And so I called Representative Webb and explained to her the situation. And the rules changed from saying, this is a time to advocate, which is what prayer is. You're advocating for those that are hurting, for those that have been harmed. And the new rules said this is in no way a time to advocate. And so they basically wanted to neuter the prayer and basically just have me come up there and say something to make everyone in the room feel comfortable. And I wasn't willing to do that. And Representative Webb told me on the phone, I said, my inclination is to ignore these new rules and to pray in a way that even pushes back against these new rules. And she agreed. And so what I did is I scrapped the prayer that I had originally wrote. I wrote a new one that was a lament. And I prayed a lament because the new rules said, it's not a time to bring up anything political. And to say that the lives of Black people wanting to be free and have equal rights is political, or to say that the right of a child who wants to see their doctor who is transgender is political, or to say that we should have clean water to drink is political, the state gets to determine they've politicized all these things and then call them off limits for a pastor to talk about. When in fact, a woman wanting the right to be able to make decisions with her doctor isn't political. That's about her living her life. And so I named those things, and I lamented that we, the legislature and we as a culture, have politicized people's lives when in fact these people are children of God. We have dehumanized them by trying to make them political issues when they are, in fact, people just trying to live and to thrive, and that God's desire is for them to thrive. And so I prayed a lament, and it upset some people.
And Bubba texted in. He said, what does your guest think about the LGBTQ plus friendly churches in Orlando being targeted and harassed by conservative gadflies? He's worried about things escalating. I mean, you've lived this life.
Yeah.
How different is it today than it's been for,
Yeah, I'm very close with Reverend Rushing Kimball that's over in Orlando, and a lot of LGBTQ affirming churches there and some of these churches, right, were in a different place before Pulse happened. They may have been more silently supportive. And after Pulse happened, I think churches everywhere, but especially in Orlando, realized that they have an obligation to not be silent, because when we're silent, it only harms those who are being harmed. And so, I stand in solidarity with Reverend Kimball over there and with people who are being harmed. We have protesters here in St. Pete. In fact, there was a protest just this last Sunday at a church in Clearwater. And that pastor called me and said, and they're a safe place, right? They have LGBT people at their church, but they're less vocal than Allendale. And he said, this was a minor inconvenience for us this morning. He said, I hated the fact that some of the people had to hear what they heard walking in. He said, but it reminded me, and this man's cisgender straight male, he said, it reminded me that LGBTQ people and black and brown people and others who are on the margins have to experience this type of trauma almost every day of their lives, in microaggressions and in deeper, real ways. And so it reinvigorated him to realize he has to be more outspoken in his privilege and to stand with people who are being harmed.
Andy, I wanted to ask you before we wrap up, and I feel like I wanted to bring you on also because, we're talking a lot about God with a capital G and Jesus, and I know that can make people uncomfortable, but what people are fighting for is the difference between right and wrong. And when we were talking, I asked you, how come being gay is seen as this big sin when other people are committing so many other sins that are so blatant? Why is being gay the one that's being picked on, for me in particular? And you said something about sin, and I think whether you call it sin or right and wrong, that what you told me, I think I really wanted people to hear.
Yeah, first of all, I would just say to anyone listening that being who God made you to be as a gay, lesbian, trans person, queer, is not sin. The sin that's happening around that are churches that are dehumanizing and discriminating against them and have twisted Scripture to make claims that somehow these are not beloved children of God, exactly how they were made. And sin itself is simply just being stripped away from community, being pushed out, being separated from each other, being separated from God. And so the only sin that exists in this are churches and faith leaders who are harming people and increasing the odds that a child's going to try to take their life, or that a person's going to grow up hating themselves because of the religious misteachings that they had given to them.
Thank you for that.
And Jackson, in 30 seconds, when you look at somebody like Pastor Andy Oliver, how important is his congregation to your objectives as a political strategist and congregations like his?
Hugely. I have massive respect for what Pastor Oliver has managed to accomplish in his time in St. Petersburg, Florida. I live just down the street from Allendale. I grew up in the church, and frankly, I had very negative experiences. And I think that Pastor Oliver has given me faith that there is a way forward through the church, which is something that I did not, frankly, believe before. Frankly, between law school and running political campaigns across the state of Florida, my life has been very busy in the last couple of years, but it's been on my list to start becoming a more regular attendee. And I think to sum up the thoughts, I think it's crazy that we don't have more democratic infrastructure that plugs directly into not just congregations and churches, but pre-existing third spaces and communities. And we rebuild that cycle after cycle after cycle. And that's why we have to have spaces for people to organize in politics as their job year round. So,
Jackson McMillan from Key Lime Strategies, thank you for joining us today. Chris Mitchell from Stagecraft Digital at the top of the show. And, of course, Pastor Andy Oliver of Allendale United Methodist Church. Thank you so much. Celine Sanfelice, thank you for coming in. Looking forward to getting your story out there. My name is Ray Rowe. On behalf of myself and Mitch Perry, thank you so much for listening to The Skinny. Jo Ellen is back, finally. Welcome home. She's in Studio One. She'll have art in your ear for you. And you've been listening to WMNF Tampa. Thank you for keeping the lights on at this radio station. It's all because of you.